Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
This week we have a new guest on the show, Jim Rubin. Jim is a Minneapolis-based business leader and co-founder of Mint Properties. Known for his thoughtful approach to housing, community development, and civic engagement, Jim recently appeared in the documentary The Precarious State, which we spoke to Rick Kopchilla about recently. This documentary explores the complex challenges facing Minnesota, from housing affordability to crime and public trust in institutions. With Rubin, we will break down his participation in the documentary, the broader picture of what's really going on in Minneapolis' housing and political landscape, and the public safety component, as well as recent attacks targeting Rubin himself and where we go from here. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. We are pleased to welcome Jim Rubin to the show for the first time. Thank you for joining us. Jim, we recently watched The Precarious State, the documentary about what is going on in Minneapolis. We spoke with Rick Kopchilla. You were one that was featured predominantly in that as a business owner, as a developer in the area. And talk to us a little bit about what drew you to participate in the documentary and what you were hoping to get across message-wise.
Sure. Thanks for having me. As far as, Rick Kopchilla and documentary, it was interesting because long ago, like late last year, my business, which is affordable housing, I provide apartments in the city of Minneapolis. It was suffering and I was feeling a lot of pain. And so I was trying to figure out what was going on, who's driving the city and what are they doing? And I was trying to figure out what the issues were and how we got here. And interestingly enough, at the same time, Rick Kopchilla was trying to do the same thing. He was doing it, of course, because he had in mind to do the documentary. I was doing it because I wanted to figure out how to help the situation make it better. So we inevitably crossed paths and realized we were trying to do the same thing. And when he heard my story, he realized it would be good for his documentary. It kind of fit what he was learning, and it was kind of a good case study. So then we started working together, long ago, or it was very early in this year. As far as what I was hoping to get out of it, I have been, like I said, running apartments in the city for over 30 years, and everything was great up until 2020. And then things changed in 2020. And it's been very, very, very difficult, to say the least, on running properties in the city of Minneapolis. And so I've been constantly trying to tell friends and acquaintances and people in the business or leaders in the city the challenges I'm facing. And they were so severe and so hard, most people didn't believe me. They just didn't think it was, Jim, it can't be that bad. Jim, you're exaggerating. And the documentary was just a great way to show, no, things in the city really are this bad. The challenges really are this severe. The problems they really do exist. And so I was happy, Rick coming along and doing his documentary was a great opportunity for the story to get told to a broad audience in a way that they couldn't argue against. So I think it brings awareness to what's really happening in the city of Minneapolis, which of course is great. I just hope we can use that to institute change.
It was really shocking to watch and I guess even really see the visuals of what's going on. I mean, I will say my late teens, early 20s was in the uptown area, and to see that what it's become is just crazy. And then to hear some of the facts. You talk about an area where you have two apartment buildings on two of the corners, and talk about how since George Floyd, there have been in the area 4 murders since the murder of George Floyd, and how it's kind of become this open air drug market. Talk to us about how that has become, what in your opinion ultimately led to that, and what that's doing to your business in the community.
Yeah, so again, this all starts back in 2020 when there was the vote to defund the police. And since then, a large chunk of the city council, primarily the DSA people and the people who vote with the DSA, have continued on this kind of anti-police platform, anti-law enforcement platform. For my story, you have to understand I have many, many properties, but they're all in Southwest Minneapolis. So kind of like the broad uptown area, Whittier, where the Minneapolis Institute of Arts is, Loring Park. So we're in that area, right, southwest of downtown. So I can talk about that area. And I tell people there's really a couple different ways I describe crime. There is what the documentary covered, which is 19th and Nicollet. So at 19th and Nicollet, back in approximately early spring of 2021, gang members basically took over that intersection and started an open air drug market. And it has continued unabated up through today. And there can be anywhere from 2 to, I kid you not, 30 to 40 people just loitering out in the open, standing there openly dealing drugs. And with that comes just what you'd expect. There's littering, there's fighting, there's drinking, there's open air drug markets, there's sometimes fights happen, sometimes guns go off, and there's, part of that's homicides. And so what happens is that it really causes not just that intersection, but really the whole neighborhood to have a bad reputation, right? So now we have several properties in that area. People don't want to live in that neighborhood, right? So we've lost all our good tenants, and good tenants won't live there. And this problem, again, has been going on. It's basically 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to midnight, right? And it's been happening. And so through the years, basically, I have been screaming and hollering to everybody I can get to listen to me in the city. City council members, the mayor's office, the mayor himself, all levels of MPD. And so a few months ago, I finally got a one-on-one with Chief O'Hare and sat down with him, and I was able to introduce myself, explain what's happening at 19th and Nicollet, make sure he was in the loop, and just ask him what can be done. And he looked at me and he said, Jim, I understand the issue. I know exactly what's going on. I've been fully debriefed. Unfortunately, we can't help you. We cannot solve that problem. You're basically on your own. And so when you realize that, he did actually then kind of walk through and explain to me why he couldn't help, which I can get into in a minute here. But what basically is being said is all levels of the city are saying, when a gang moves in, when there's a homeless encampment, when there's people taking drugs, whatever, when something bad is happening, the city does not have the tools to fix it. And we've heard of these spots throughout town, right? Chicago and Franklin, or Lake and Blaisdell, right? So, and you'll hear about them, and you'll see gunshots, and you'll see them on the news. And the city's just unable to solve those problems. So that's kind of one level of crime, which is gangs or drug users or homeless kind of taking over an area, and the city not having the tools and the ability to take care of it. That's what I'm dealing with at 19th and Nicollet. But the rest of my portfolio, which again is kind of the Whittier and Loring Park and uptown area, there's a little bit different twist, which is when we talk about policing, effective police departments do a whole variety of things for society. They do really simple things like getting a cat out of a tree, to really bad things like multiple homicides. And there's everything in between: a break-in, a stolen bike, a stolen car, assault, shootings, whatever, right? There's a whole litany of things. When the numbers of police officers started to drop, and there was this onslaught of attacks against MPD, they lost a lot of resources, and they kind of tightened up what they're doing. They lost the ability to do all of these things. So what they did over time is they just basically raised the bar of what they were working on. If it's a serious enough problem, shootings and carjackings and homicides, they will respond, they will come, and they do a fantastic job. And those statistics are improving, which is great. But the cost is that everything below these serious things, they don't come. So when my tenants who are living, in affordable units in Minneapolis have their bike stolen and they call the police, they don't come. If their car's broken into, they don't come. If somebody hits their car and drives off, the police don't come. If your storage unit is broken into and everything's stolen, the police don't come. If somebody's dealing drugs outside your front door, the police don't come. If somebody's passed out in your hallway and you don't know what to do, the police don't come. So what it feels like to citizens is it feels like there's no law enforcement, right? And so everybody you talk to who lives in Minneapolis or does business in Minneapolis, they're just having to live with all these what I call livability crimes. MPD has no ability to address them or solve them. So you see, you have kind of two different kind of categories of crime. You have this kind of they've lost control of a portion of the city and they can't get it back. Or you have just all of your livability issues that we just have to accept as citizens, because MPD has lost so much of their ability to do their job, whether it's resources, tools of engagement, or number of officers. They've just been scaled so far back that they can't even address this. And so that is life in Minneapolis for my employees, for me, for my business, for my tenants, but frankly, for everybody, for my neighborhoods, for the restaurants, for everybody who lives in Minneapolis. The stories are all very much the same. Lack of law enforcement is having an impact on life in the city. And that is absolutely true. You saw some of the big bad stuff in the documentary, but, as rights, like a lot of these livability crimes, that's, again, a big reason why Uptown is closed, because all those livability crimes are happening. And it's just very hard to have a thriving business like a restaurant or retail store when all this stuff is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about how much time my family, we grew up in the suburbs, just 25 minutes north of the cities. I got married in Minneapolis a couple years ago, and before booking our venue, had to call my mom to make sure my aunts, and my family members would be comfortable coming down for an evening event and staying overnight downtown Minneapolis, because I didn't know. I know that they don't spend their time down there anymore. I know that that's not really how things have gone. So, and that's obviously, I'm not somebody that's living and breathing it every single day. So I can only imagine what you and your employees and your tenants have to go through, to the point where you are also now selling a few properties. We know that prices on properties have declined greatly. Part of that due to interest rates we saw in a piece, but also the lack of, or the declining living conditions. Talk to us a little bit about your decision to do that and how that's maybe changed your path forward.
Yeah. So again, I've been doing apartments for 30 years, and we grew quite large. When things started going south in 2020, at that time, 90% of my business was in Minneapolis, 10% was in St. Paul. And my plans were to be 100% in Minneapolis and keep the buildings and keep the business until I die. We were going to retire here and live here happily ever after. Well, what happened is when the anti-police movement really took hold, the police department recoiled and crime spiked, I had still the desire to fight it through and make a go of it. But after a few years of that, I realized I couldn't. We were losing too much money. The stress gets too much. As a small business owner, when your business starts going south, it's pretty tough, right? Banks start calling. You're losing money. You don't know how you're going to pay employees. Your operations are a lot more complicated. There's just so many problems. And so then your health starts to fail. You can't sleep. You maybe drink too much. You're too much stress, health problems. And it was early 2023. I realized I'm just a human being. I'm not going to make it. So I thought about it a bit, and I just made the decision, you know what, I'm just going to take advantage of this to do a life change. And so I talked with the wife and made sure that she was okay. And we decided we're going to completely sell our business in Minnesota and just go on to a new chapter in life. A bit of the story is we do have 4 kids. They're now all adults. They live somewhere else in the United States. And that, of course, factors into this. So a few years ago, we made the decision to change courses, and we're going to sell everything. At my peak, we had well over 1,500 apartments and about 78 physical buildings. So this is big. I think Mayor Fry actually called me one day and told me I was the largest single affordable housing provider in the city of Minneapolis, right? So this is a big deal. And we were very happy, very proud with what I did, but I got to live, so I decided to make the change. So we've been selling since. I've currently sold about a third of our portfolio. And yeah, you saw we did a couple of sales recently. Our plan, though, is just to keep going to the very end. It's going to take a while. My approach isn't to just throw in the towel, drop the price to whatever and sell. I want to try to go out with my head up. And so I am kind of methodically going through and making sure I'm getting a good enough deal in order for me to sell. And I think it's going to take a few more years. And it, of course, is directly tied to the state of the city. And I tell people it used to be, before the city went south or took a wrong turn, whenever an apartment building came up for sale, it was like a feeding frenzy. Many, many people wanted to buy it and typically bid the price over what you were asking. Okay. Well, that is completely 100% reversed. There are more sellers than there are buyers, right? So that when you want to sell, it takes a long time and you have to negotiate your price down, and it's really hard to get across the finish line. And so selling takes a lot more time and is a lot harder because there are so few buyers, because the issues are obvious. They see the leadership and which way the city's going, and people don't want to buy. And so because of that, the values peaked, say, at the end of 2019. Since then, in Minneapolis, particularly my area, values have dropped between 20 and 40% from their peak. So that's obviously a significant drop, because usually you have a loan on a building. So when a property drops 20 to 40%, that's most of the value you have in a property. Boom, it's gone. And the other, of course, frustrating thing is around the United States, well-run cities, their prices have gone up from 2019. So not only have we gone down, but we've foregone any of the up that a lot of the other places have seen. So we're down, close to 50% from where we should be had the city been run properly. So yeah, I'm trying to sell in this environment. I have hope that things are going to go well in November. I have hope that the city's going to get back on track, and hopefully we can expedite on the way out. But yes, you mentioned, some of the articles you've seen that, values are down. You mentioned interest rates, which, yes, is part of it. In fairness, that is part of it. However, now interest rates are coming down slowly, but that is happening. But really the biggest issue, the reason there are so few buyers looking to buy in Minneapolis or invest in Minneapolis, is crime and the city leadership. Those two issues, people who, in particular big investors who invest in this, they're pretty smart. They do their homework. They know what's going on. They are not buying in Minneapolis at this time.
I want to share a bit of my past, and I don't know if I've ever discussed this on the podcast, Becky, but I worked on a race for mayor in Minneapolis in 97. I worked on Barbara Carlson's race when she ran for mayor of Minneapolis. And at that time, it was coming off a pretty rough summer, the summer 96 and 95. And Barbara Carlson has since passed away, but her ex-husband at the time was the governor of the state, Arnie Carlson. And he had to call in the National Guard and the State Patrol. I'm sorry, he called in the State Patrol. I want to be precise. He called in the State Patrol to help with some policing issues in Minneapolis. And when I was working on her race for mayor in 97, in the summer of 97, there were a number of landlords who were concerned about crime, and they organized something called the Crack Tour. And I remember going with the Carlson campaign with Barbara Carlson in a car one day and one evening, where we literally just saw in downtown Minneapolis you could literally go on a crack tour and see this crime just unfolding. And it was really nerve-wracking to be at. But when I was campaigning with Barbara Carlson and she was running for mayor, she was talking about the relationships between crime, landlords, and getting people the best. And as Jim was talking, I was remembering a bit of my past, and it was and I don't think I've ever discussed it on the podcast, that I'd worked on that race or I'd been on a crack tour in Minneapolis. And so to see it go back, I think is just sad. And I want to pinpoint a bit, because Jim, you have a good institutional understanding of Minneapolis politics. Explain to our listeners and to Becky and I a bit of DFL leadership, but what we're drawing a distinction here is between Democrats and members of the DSA. I think what your tipping point is the arrival of members of the DSA, because Minneapolis has long been a DFL city.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a handful of years ago, our industry was getting criticized because we weren't more active in politics, and it was kind of starting to spin out of control. And I thought, actually, that's not fair, because again, I've been doing this 30 years. For the first 25 years, I didn't have to be involved because the city ran well. So you kind of get used to things just working, so you're not paying attention to what's happening in City Hall because the city is just functioning fine. And that's largely where we were for many, many years. And what happened was started in 2016, but in 2017, there was a city election. And that was the first time where the DSA had a presence. Okay, so we here are used to the DFL, Democrat Party. They've run the city forever, ever. They run the state. It's right. They're the most dominant party in the state, for sure, in the city. Well, a new group came into the picture, and they called themselves the DSA, or Democrat Socialists of America, or socialists, right? And so this new kind of group, or this new philosophy, entered into politics here in the city of Minneapolis. I believe it was the election of 2017. And with ranked choice voting and with some of the groundwork that they did, they made significant inroads into numbers of positions on the city council, right? And then since then, they have been a significant presence. And in the current city council, out of 13 city council members, basically nine either are officially DSA members and proud of it, or they vote with the DSA almost all the time, right? So that's out of 13, that is how much they control. And in the last couple of years, especially at the end of last year, I'm looking at this, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, okay, if you look at the DSA platform and what they embrace, it's pretty destructive. There's a lot of problems in there. And I think if most normal people would read that platform, they would not vote for it. So how does that platform, how do people who embrace that platform get a vast majority on a city council? How did they do that? And so I started trying to dig into the details. And basically what's happened in the city of Minneapolis is that the DSA is not an official party. So what they do is they run under the DFL banner, right? So they call themselves a DFL member, most of them. They actively try to get the DFL endorsement. They want the DFL stamp of approval. And so they were able to basically do that at a grassroots level where a socialist, somebody who agrees with the DSA platform, does the work to get the DFL to give them the stamp of approval and give them the endorsement. And how many people do you know actually research the platform as a city council member?
And
nobody.
Yes, and to that point, and Becky, I think you're muted. To that point, Becky, you're muted. You know that? Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. To that point, Jim, earlier this summer, I think I did it in July. I launched a Substack, and one of the first posts I did was on the DSA platform, and we had a big discussion on it. I was surprised. Again, I live in Eagan. Becky lives in Friendly Fridley. And so we're not, there's not a DSA component where we live, but I was noticing a lot of discussion on the mayor's race, particularly Fatah getting endorsed by the DFL. The endorsement has since been revoked, but there wasn't a lot of, I think, quality separation and quality analysis on the difference between a DFL and a member of the DSA. And so I did a post about that at the end of July, talking about the distinction between the DSA and the DFL. And as someone who used to run a website called Minnesota Democrats Exposed and was the deputy chair, I got to tell you, I know Minnesota Democrats in this state, and there is a big difference between the DFL and the DSA.
Yes. And you're hitting on a good point, which is it appears the DSA likes to obfuscate, right? They like to kind of compete. They like to let the public know that they're DFL endorsed, and they proudly present that everywhere. But when they get in, they vote according to their DSA platform. And so by confusing matters, by kind of blending in with the Democrats of the Democrat Party, it is very difficult. And that's what happened in 2017, in 2021, in 2020, particularly 2023. And that's why this year, that's why I'm doing this podcast. I'm trying to get the word out to try to educate people. You have to pay attention. There is a imposter here, basically. They're imposters. They're acting and talking as though they're DFL. They're trying to present themselves as a DFL, but they are a DSA member and they vote like the DSA votes. And so this election has been a lot about educating people that there is one party in this town, which is DFL, but there's two factions within that party, and they are very, very different. And I would tell you, behind the scenes, they do not like each other. They are not friendly. They do butt heads a lot. And frankly, all 13 or most of the 13 city council races are not between a Democrat and Republican. No. They're between a moderate DFL and a DSA person. So you have to look at every competitive race, including the mayor's race and including park board races. It's all the same thing. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's DSA versus moderate Democrat. And so you have to actually look beyond the endorsements. You have to look into how they categorize themselves, how they voted when they were in city council. Are they officially a member of the DSA party? You have to look into that. Now, I will tell you, if I can say this, there's a website, allofmpls.org, which helps to clarify this. And they've listed all the moderate Democrat candidates for city council. So it's allofmpls.org. Boom. First page, scroll, it says, Mayor Fry is the right candidate, and then shows. So anybody listening who's confused who to vote for, that website will tell you the answer. Those are the moderate Democrats, the ones we want to win. So we have that out there to make it easy for people.
Absolutely. It's been fascinating to see this happen on the left because we've seen the factions on the right very publicly over the last decade and evolve and the wedge drive deeper. So now to see it on the left has been very eye-opening to see. And they're certainly taking advantage of the fact that the endorsement label and running under the DFL umbrella, and the fact that as much as we want voters to be as informed as we are and know all the truth, they just really aren't. And some of them, that's what they look for, that label, and that's kind of their standard bearer of how to move forward. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there was a movement to try to change whether it was the platform or the bylaws to make it so that if somebody was endorsed by the DFL and the DSA, they had to choose, right? That they wouldn't be able to run under with both endorsements. And I think that was something that failed to move forward. I would expect that it's something that we see a resurgence of in the past, but it does appear that there are folks like yourself trying to actively differentiate those two.
Yeah, and I'll be clear. So for me, I'm trying to, this election, because it's so close, i.e. 13 days from today, I'm trying to just continue to educate and point out the differences. There are other people who are working more long-term, which is kind of fixing this issue within the DFL party, the state and city level. And so there have been movements within the DFL party to help clean this up, and they've been unsuccessful. So as of now, the Minneapolis DFL party, it really continues to be both DFL and DSA playing in the same area. And I want to point out something you touched on, because again, you mentioned the DSA politicians do try, in particular the city of Minneapolis, get that DFL endorsement. And the reason is because if you get the DFL endorsement, it's kind of a stamp of approval, but it also opens up automatic endorsements from different groups and labor unions. It opens up money. It opens up a whole litany, a whole bunch of support that you can use, right? So if you get that endorsement, you have such a leg up on everybody else running. We did some research in the last two citywide cycles, mayor and city council. Those candidates that got the DFL endorsement won over 90% of the time. Only twice was that overturned and the other person won in 2 full cycles citywide. So it makes a huge difference. The DFL is a big party, has lots of resources, right? And so getting their stamp of approval is a big help. And that's why the DSA wants to play in that space. And that's why they want to get that DFL endorsement.
And Becky, to that point, just a quick process thing I'll point out to you. When you seek the Republican Party's endorsement, and you enter into a list agreement, you agree to run as a Republican. And so we have anti-fusion laws in the state, so you can't be endorsed by 2 major parties at the same time and run at the same time with 2 major party endorsements or be on the ballot as such. But when you get endorsed by the Republican Party, you agree to run as a Republican. I will say to you that to just from a party process standpoint and from Democrats that I've spoken to, there is a massive divide between whether DSA members represent what is in the DFL party. And when we went through that platform, Becky, we discovered a number of issues that are really against what the DFL stand for. And we say that as a couple of homeless Republicans, but understanding and working with our guests that we had on, there is a substantive issue. I know there's a short time between now and the election, and it's important to interview people like Jim. But long term, I think there is going to need to be a discussion inside the DFL as to whether it is compatible to be a DSA endorsed candidate and then simultaneously be a DFLer.
One thing that we have known from working in politics, that if you cross the wrong people or maybe piss off the wrong people, you got a target on your back. And Jim, I think you somehow became the subject of a target on your back from the Senator Fates and Minneapolis for Many group recently. We know that they made many false claims about you, posting that and sending emails that you were a negligent landlord who is single-handedly responsible for hundreds of property violations. And then very quickly, I mean, it was, as somebody who has worked in PR and communications for a decade, I don't know that I've ever seen something quite like it. They put out a very lengthy statement saying, "We retract those statements and sincerely apologize to Mr. Rubin. He has never been negligent in his duties as a landlord by a court, nor is it fair to say that he is personally responsible for every property violation found at his company's properties." Walk me through this a little bit, because they clearly, was somebody tweet happy? How'd you get in their crosshairs? Give us the
Sure.
lowdown.
Sure. So just for everybody, Minneapolis for the Many is a PAC, is a political organization that now for years has raised money to kind of further candidates running as the DSA, for socialist candidates, or people who will vote that way. So Minneapolis for the Many supports that platform and the politicians who embrace it. All right. And they're not affiliated directly with a candidate. So therefore they have different fundraising rules, and they can kind of push the envelope more than a candidate can, right? One of the activities that Minneapolis for the Many has done for years now is correct. If you're trying to fight against one of their preferred candidates, you are now fair game to be attacked by them. And so again, it's so funny. I just tell people I'm just a guy. I own some apartment buildings, but I care about the city and I want it better. So I'm just a citizen trying to do something to help the city because it's suffering so much, right? So what am I doing? Well, I'm looking at candidates that I think will move us forward, and I support them. Well, because I'm doing that as much as I can, yes, then my name gets out there and my face gets out there, and then therefore I became I was attacked by the Socialist PAC, Minneapolis for the Many, and you were reading some of the things they said and published on me. So I felt when I saw that go out that they went too far. So in politics, if you are a politician, you kind of are more fair game for this kind of stuff. But when you're just a citizen that's trying to participate in democracy, there's kind of a different set of rules of how you can attack citizens.
Correct.
And that's really, I felt I was in that category. And they went too far. And so I did a little bit of research, talked around, did some networking to find somebody in the legal profession who kind of plays in this space. And I ended up getting somebody who was very good. And yeah, we pretty quickly went on them. There was just some back and forth, but we made it very clear to them that they'd crossed a line. And so they were, they kind of exposed themselves to legal troubles. And so what happened was, behind the scenes, we went back and forth. We created a whole kind of settlement, basically, which, as these things go, I'm not allowed to discuss the details. However, you saw probably the most important piece, which is the public apology. And so we obviously it's public, so we can talk about it. And we were very happy how that turned out because, of course I'm biased, but I've spent 30 years trying to provide affordable housing, and I've been working with city leadership and doing the best darn job I can. And then to have them put out what they did was upsetting. But now they're right. There isn't any way you can call me a negligent landlord. In fact, the opposite is true. And so it's kind of nice for them to actually change the dialogue from, all landlords are bad to, no, actually, affordable housing is important. Jim's one of the guys that's doing a good job at that. We actually need to support him and thank him. So we liked that it didn't just go from an apology, but it actually kind of turned the tables and said, no, this is actually a good public service that he's providing, and we appreciate it. So we're very happy with that. But yeah, I think the extent of the apology and the quickness kind of shows that they recognize they went too far, right? And so that was pretty easy.
I have to say that I agree with Becky from a PR comms perspective. It doesn't get more clear than their apology was. I mean, it was very detailed, and there wasn't a lot of wiggle room out of it. And so congratulations. Sorry for that experience that you had to go through. But congratulations on getting a settlement and also getting a public statement, which is very critical in those types of legal issues, is that there's some type of acknowledgement, not only that the statements were inaccurate, but that how inaccurate they were. And it was a very clear PR statement.
So
yes.
I want to kind of get as somebody who has been working in politics and has been firsthand involved in some of this situation, what do you think about, I mean, this is, I like to pose my $1 million questions, but the $1 million question of kind of this highlights the larger picture. the larger problem that we have in our political discourse right now, that business leaders are targeted. We're doing a lot of doxing. We've got individuals that are targeted. How do we strike that down and remind people that bring that humanity back? You're a business leader. You're somebody who has provided housing and affordable housing for thousands or tens of thousands of Minnesotans and allowed people to live in the city that we all love and, build in this community. Yet some future political leaders in the area or current political leaders are targeting you. How do we kind of change that political discourse and stop this from happening before, it's having to come to the settlement and agreements that you are forced to do here?
Unfortunately, I'm going to largely say I don't know. Because what's interesting is I'm not a political insider, right? I'm a landlord, right? I provide housing, right? I do think, but to the point we just made on what I was able to do, hopefully that sets a precedent, right? Both ways. For those who attack, to maybe calm it down a little bit, but also for those who are attacked to have the bravery to stand up and push back. Because I hear it a lot. So in my industry, I hear a lot of people who don't want to give to candidates. They don't want to make any public statements because they are afraid they're going to be attacked. And I think we need more people to just be brave enough to stand up and say enough is enough and push back on that. I do think that will help and would help. So that was one nice side effect of what I did, was, again, hopefully setting an example for what can be done when people do cross a line.
You have put yourself out there very significantly in this election cycle, and you described earlier in this episode kind of how it's progressed to where it is right now. And you're clearly at a breaking point. Describe to our listeners what happens to the city of Minneapolis if there is a DSA takeover of the city.
Well, I don't like this question because it's very doom and gloom. So just to clarify, though, in the city of Minneapolis, there's really two parts to the power structure, right? You have the mayor. Correct. And then you have the city council, right?
Correct.
Right now, the mayor is considered a moderate Democrat, and the city council is considered a majority DSA. And Correct. So you have this kind of tug of war. Not a lot happens, and they can kind of stop most of the bad stuff from happening. So if we at least have a split, we're probably going to be something similar, right? Let's say we lost the mayor, but got the city council to be moderate, or we kept the mayor, but the city council was still socialist. You're going to see a lot of what you see today. I tend to spend most of my time talking about if Mayor Fry wins and we have a good majority city council. I spend my time in that space because It's positive, right? And I talk about, this is really important. People talk about downward spirals in city, right? As it gets worse, then it gets worse, then it gets kind of feeds on itself and goes down. And you've seen some of that with crime and then closing businesses, and then it gets worse and worse. I actually think if you have Mayor Fry get reelected and a majority good city council, you might see an upward spiral. Because I'll tell you, just to give you one example, I know for a fact there are significant numbers of large investors that are not investing in Minneapolis because they see the direction the city's going, the leadership. If they see that leadership change and it's good leadership, they will quickly say, oh, this is going to start going up, so I want to quickly get in before those prices start to rise.
Got it.
This could happen overnight. And I do believe this kind of thing will happen. If we lose the mayor and we lose the city council, again, I don't want to sound too doom and gloom at Armageddon, but I don't see how the city survives. So I tell people, for example, even with where we are today, my neighborhoods they're slowly but surely shutting down. We don't have enough police force. Crime is bad. So slowly but surely, one building at a time in my neighborhood, one business at a time is closing up. Okay, that's under this. Could you imagine if the DSA gets to implement all of their policies? And another important point that people need to understand is everybody that gets elected, the mayor, 13 city council members, the entire park board, all of those are for a 4-year term. That might be the most important thing I've ever said. You've heard me say it. You saw it on the documentary. The city cannot survive 4 more years. We can't survive 4 more years of DSA policies and pit politicians. We can't. We're already dwindling with where we are. If this gets worse, if they get in complete control, again, I don't want to go. There are just so many policies. You'd have to go right down their platform.
Got it.
And you implement those policies. But part of the definition of socialism is anti-capitalism. Right?
Correct.
So They don't want private businesses. They don't want a police force. I mean, these are their platforms. In fact, they don't want private ownership of apartments. They think that's immoral. So
that's where I was going to go right next.
Now,
it's right to your business.
Go down these list of things and say there is no checks and balances. So it gets so doom and gloom, and I get so depressed. I'm an optimistic guy, so I don't spend any time in that space. I just say I want to do everything I can in my power to make sure the good guys win in November, and if that happens, we're great. And I just until then, I want to do everything we can to make sure we win in November.
I think that's a great approach. I've been a Vikings season. My family's been seasons ticket holders since '61. I am an internal optimist by design. I'm wired that way. So I love to hear the positivity and the focus. I think where I was trying to go is there is as much as I think Republicans in general like to think that Minneapolis is on its own, there's a relationship that the city has with the state, with all of us, all of the other communities in the area. It's the largest city in our state. We as Minnesotans who want to see this state succeed should want its largest city to succeed. And so I think sometimes Republicans are a bit gleeful with what's going on in Minneapolis from the standpoint of that it can be a little bit of this is what you could get statewide. But what I think is so important that you're pointing out is the distinction between the Democrats that have been over the years you've been in Minneapolis, Democrats you can work with that have different, maybe clear policy agendas than Republicans, but some of these members of the DSA, which their platform is simply horrific.
Yeah. All right. So I got three things that hopefully I can get through here. So from a state perspective, again, I'm biased. I wholeheartedly agree. As the city of Minneapolis goes, so goes the state of Minnesota, right? The major sports teams, the major business hub, the largest city, the entertainment, the reputation of the whole state is tied to Minneapolis. And Minneapolis is largely the economic engine for the state. So for those people who sit outstate and are happy or kind of smug about Minneapolis falling, again, I disagree. I do think it hurts the entire state when Minneapolis falls. So that's the state level. But what's very interesting is the county level. Hennepin County is very large. There's a lot of cities in Hennepin County. A lot of property taxes are assessed on the county level. Okay? When Minneapolis is successful and booming, those downtown office towers and our apartment buildings pay a lot of property tax.
Yep.
When those downtown office buildings drop 90, 89%, and apartment buildings drop 30, 40%, property taxes the county and the cities still need their money. So where do they get that? From homeowners. So I have people who live, like, say, in Minnetonka on the lake, and they're like, I don't care, but what do I care about Minneapolis? And I'm like, you should, because guess what their property taxes are doing right now? They're spiking because no longer are the office buildings in downtown Minneapolis carrying the heavy load. So Minneapolis means a lot to Hennepin County. So if you live in Hennepin County, you should care about what's happening in Minneapolis. Not to mention that I do know crime is spilling over into neighboring cities. In fact, that. So both from a state level and from a county level, people should care. All Minnesotans should care. Yep. And I tell people this all the time. All of the things that made the city of Minneapolis great are still there. We still have the Vikings. We still have all the sports teams, the theater, the entertainment, the parks, the lakes, the transportation, the great restaurants. All we need, that's all still there. All we need is good leadership. If we get good leadership, I do think this turns around quickly because all of those good elements, those elements that made us great are still there. So I do think that it does come down to leadership and we could turn around. And the last point I want to make, because you've mentioned now a few times Republicans. From what I understand in the city of Minneapolis, Republicans are roughly 20% of the registered voters. That's a pretty small minority. But here's where it's important. This is such an important election. The Republicans' choice for who's going to run the city are not Republican versus Democrat. It's moderate Democrat versus DSA. We need all Republicans to show up and vote the right way because, believe it or not, some of these city council races are decided by 10 or 20 votes. Every vote counts. So I keep telling people, if you're plugged in and you understand this and you know who to vote for, go tell your neighbors and have them tell their neighbors and your brothers and your sisters and your friends, because we have to take back the city. And that's one of the positive things here is I do believe that the percent of the population in Minneapolis that subscribes to DSA policies is very little, maybe 10%, maybe 20%. The problem is 100% of them vote because they're very rabid, they're very engaged. However, if we get enough just normal citizens that want our city back, that want this to be good again, to show up and vote, the socialists can't stop us. They can't stop that. There's too many of us. This is very, very simple. In 13 days, if enough citizens show up and vote, the city turns a corner and we will move away from the DSA platform. And Republicans need to understand they are important to this. They're very, very important to this, because if they help come and vote for good leaders, it will help the city.
Thank you for that. I think it's fascinating to look at it at the different levels, and also a reminder to folks who might not ascribe to the Democrat policies, but really it is a huge choice for those not envious of those in that situation, trying to wonder what's going to happen at all of those different levels of government. Before we close, I do want to hit lastly on public safety. We know obviously who is mayor and who is in the city council chambers plays a big role in what happens to the police force in the area and public safety. Aside from obviously hopefully not being defunded, what do our police need? What do they need to continue to provide, or to provide more, so that we can hopefully encourage more people to come back? And whether it's coming to restaurants or going to shows or living back in the city, what do police need?
That is a spectacular question. And because I've been living this for years and I work with officers at MPD all the time, I'm kind of learning how did we get here? What's going on? What went wrong? And I break it down generally into 5 things, all right, that have been done, right? So I'm going to tell you the 5 things that have been done to get us where we are. And the solution is to do the opposite of these 5 things, all right? Here's how we got here. Number 1 is the leadership, city, county, and state has turned on MPD. And if you hear people talking, they say, well, the police are the problem. The police are the bad guys. The police, we need to get rid of them, right? So there's kind of public vilification of the police force, which of course makes it hard to recruit. And it's not good for morale when your leadership is telling you that's who you are. So kind of this negative, constant vilifying of the police. Funding is part of it. There have been several cases where they could have increased the funding and they didn't. There have been several instances where they actually decreased the funding. So for example, a couple examples. 2 years ago in November, there was $19 million of federal funds that Chief O'Hare and the Mayor Fry came to the city council and said, we want to use this $19 million for recruiting and retention. City council voted it down and then used that money to spend on their pet projects. A year-ish ago, I think it was the last time we did the budget cycle, Mayor Fry put out his budget. After he put out the budget, there was about 5 or 6 times the city council went through and specifically pulled money from the police budget and attached it to one of their pet projects. So they actually went through and lowered funding. So there's specific examples where leaders who are anti-police will pull funding whenever they can. So funding is the second thing. The third thing that a lot of people don't understand is that tools of engagement for how the police can engage the citizens have been taken away. So loitering with intent to commit a crime, blocking a sidewalk, tinted windows, expired lights. There's a lot of different tools that used to allow a police officer to approach somebody and say, what's going on here? That they've been taken away. Say they can no longer use those tools. So stopping crime and arresting people looking at anything their job has gotten a lot harder to do. Another issue that's happened is that whenever there's been a few high profile cases where an officer gets involved in a high pressure situation and it goes badly. And in those cases, at the state and county and city level, the leaders have really attacked the police officer and held them accountable. And so there's a sense in the police force that if I do engage in some high pressure situation and it goes bad, I could be the one to go to jail. They feel that way. So that makes them afraid to engage and get out of their car and do their job. And then lastly, the criminal justice system is, particularly as implemented by Mary Moriarty, is very soft on criminals, right? Her policy is, I want to prosecute police hard, but I want to be very soft on crime and soft on criminals. So when you add all this together, you get 19th and Nicollet. There's people standing there dealing drugs. What are the police supposed to do? They can't just walk up to these people anymore. They have to take pictures and document, make sure it's do all this work, and then they finally get enough evidence. Then they can go to them and they can take them downtown. And if they take them downtown, they're just back out in the street the next day. So this is why Chief O'Hare said, Jim, we can't help you. We don't have the tools and the resources to solve the problem. There's nothing we can do to solve this problem. Just standing out there drug dealing, people standing there loitering is nothing. We can't really deal with that. And if we do a whole bunch of work to try to get one of them down to the jail, they're back out the next day. I'm not going to spend my time doing that. I'm going to go solve homicides and carjackings. And so that's the story, right? So it's really, when we talk about kind of this movement to be anti-police, it's really this whole collection of things and together have gotten us where we are, which is, again, seemingly no law enforcement for people on the street. So how do you solve it? You know how you solve it? You get really good leaders that are very supportive of the police force and understand this and will slowly start to move us back in the right direction. They'll actually be on TV. They'll actually get in front of a camera and say, you know what? Actually, the police are the good guys. They're public servants and we value them, right? We're going to provide funding for them. We're going to continue to work on fixing the criminal justice system. We're going to work on getting some of their tools back and we're going to protect them and doing their job. You need good, strong leaders to kind of change the dialogue and change this whole culture back to support. That's what it takes. I'm not saying it's quick. I'm not saying it's easy, but clearly when you have a majority city council members whose platform is, we don't want police force, that's a problem. We need to switch that majority the other way.
So Jim, I have one last question here. I have to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Michael and I, for the last 3 years, have talked to a lot of elected officials, candidates, prospective candidates. I gotta say, this interview is among the top of what we're hearing, so thoughtfully put together, messaged so well. With your future opening up, as you know, your path of a property owner has maybe changed a little bit. Is there a path for you to be one of those leaders in the future, whether that's in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, or wherever life may take you?
Oh, I get this question a lot. You know what, to be honest with you, right now, I'm focused on doing what I'm doing, which is fix Minneapolis and get my life in a better spot. So far, I've said the only running for office I'm going to do is running away from office. Who knows if that's going to change in the future? But you know what, I'll be honest. I just really want to help, and I hope I am, and I'm happy to help. I'm doing what I'm doing because I have talked to so many people who have suffered so much in the city, and I think of them all the time. The restaurateur who closed, the apartment building who went back to the bank, the tenant who lost their bike and couldn't get to work, right? All of these people have, it's been tough. It's been really tough. And so it's for all of those people that I'm doing this, and I want to see it better. And so that's what I'm focused on now.
They certainly have a great champion in you. So thank you for all you're doing for them.
Jim, we want to thank you for joining us today. Give us your 10-second call to action for all the people who are going to listen to this podcast that live in Minneapolis. What should they be doing in the next 13 days?
Again, go to allofmpls.org to make sure you know who to vote for mayor and city council, and talk to your friends and your neighbors. Make sure we get out the vote. Don't take this apathy. I'm not interested. I don't care. It's very, very, very important. In 13 days, we can start the healing process. We absolutely can. And so vote, get others around you to vote. It's very simple. We do that and we will win.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Becky, we just finished an interview with Jim Rubin, a business owner, landlord, real estate in the city of Minneapolis, frustrated with what's going on with the DSA. Amazing interview. Your take?
Yeah, it was a fun one. You know, like I said at the end there, we've talked to a lot of people and it doesn't always come as smoothly and easily. And it was just a great conversation. He truly cares about what he is doing. He cares about the community. He cares about Minneapolis and its future, and obviously much more beyond just him and his business. And I think that is, you can tell that he has that sympathy and empathy for folks living and working and involved in the city and want to see it have a fruitful future. But it was wild. I want to chat about the public safety component a little bit, because I think he put it in a way that I have not really heard it before, about kind of those livable or unlivable, or how did he put it? The livable crimes, the crimes that you just have to deal with because they don't rise to that bar that is set. And that is set for so many reasons. We've talked about the criminal justice component. We've talked about the Mary Moriarty side of things with her new, law about stopping folks. And, we've talked about some of these things before, but just the fact of how he said the police chief put it to him and what they just have to deal with is so sad, because again, this is one of our biggest cities in the state, and people want to live there and want to shop and go to restaurants and visit and do this. But there's so many just like out there crimes that so many people, it makes you not want to go there, not feel comfortable and feel safe. And then you have these folks that are stuck in leases and stuck in a situation because they don't have the choice, right? Like this is where they live, and this is where they've signed leases and where they're stuck, and they have to have this unsafe situation in their hallways or outside their building or down the street. And it's really sad that it's to a point where the police, their hands are kind of tied in the matter.
Yes, first of all, and we haven't spoken about A Precarious State since we did the interview with Rick Capcella, but obviously Jim was in that, and I was certainly moved by what he said on camera during the interview, but much more so in our conversation. This is someone who I think just has a love for Minneapolis, wants Minneapolis to succeed, I think personally and obviously professionally. But he talked about, his relationship over the years with the city, and this is someone who is starting to realize that a decline is starting to happen. And I think the challenge that I could sense his frustration with where he's at, where he feels the direction of the city is going. And so I don't view him as someone who is taking this. He seems reluctant to speak out. He seems like you can really get a sense that he's doing this out of an obligation that he feels to the direction of the city, as a city that he's invested in with his businesses and his connections to the community. You can really see that he's struggling with where the city could potentially go if this DSA takeover continues. And that was sad to see, because you could tell he's certainly been, I think his reputation, has been bastardized quite a bit on social media, and there's been kind of a caricature made of who he is. But just in speaking with him, even when I asked that question, kind of the concern question where it's going, he wanted to answer it from the positive perspective of, here's what we can do. We can save the city. And I was impressed by that. And one of the things that I think has happened in the aftermath of A Precarious State is there's been this kind of desire to, I think, reframe the debate and say it's not as bad as people think, and everything that we're seeing with our eyes isn't happening. And I think Jim really put a face and a concern to what's happening in Minneapolis. And I think it was a very fascinating interview. It went longer than I expected it to be. And I think you and I, as the interview was going on, we wanted to talk to him more, because he just was really leading with his heart. I don't, and I know there's people that are probably going to roll their eyes when I say that on the podcast, but because I know he's been out to be made quite a boogeyman, but I thought he was very sincere and very concerned about the city. And while simultaneously is a business leader and someone who has worked to provide housing and ran a successful business in there. I think the thing that's most concerning long term, but the opportunity that he played out is businesses need to invest in Minneapolis. Minneapolis needs to grow, and Minneapolis needs to invest. And the reality is that the city can't grow if there's not business leaders and there's not investment going on. And right now, I think that's the real balance, is you can have these type of fun utopian concepts and be DSA and have all these crazy platform positions. But the reality is he's right. The vast majority of people don't understand what's in the DSA platform, which is part of the reason why I did my post back in July. And I think there's a truth in advertising argument going on with some of these Democrats. They're using the fact that it's a one party town to kind of piggyback off the DFL's platform, and they can slip their agenda past the goalie. Is that fair to say?
I think it's very fair to say. I think we've seen this a little bit with some of the recent elections to the city council, both in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I think there's a reason why socialism has not become a major political party. I mean, I think that there's a reason that it doesn't have mainstream attractability to the general public because it is so extreme. And I think that there is a lot of confusion. There's obviously some manipulation, maybe a little bit too far, because they're doing it within the grand scheme, or they're doing it under legally and by how they can, they're utilizing the system to their advantage, right?
Correct.
They're manipulating the system as it is right now because they haven't had to deal with this yet really on the left like we have on the right, and on the right we have not yet figured out how to bridge those divides and stop that wedge from going. We're still having those issues on our side. And I am glad that you brought up the comment about Republicans, because I'm sure I've made the comment on here in the past of how it is exciting to see, this infighting on the left in the state, in Minneapolis, wherever it might be. And it kind of helped me reframe my thoughts a little bit, because while I do personally, like to see the Democrats have to deal with some of the issues that Republicans have been dealing with, when you look at it actually about the future of a city and about the future of one of our main cities, and a city that I have spent so much time. I've worked in downtown Minneapolis. Like I said, I'm a Minnesota girl who, had my teens and 20s that I spent frequenting downtown and uptown. And to see those areas so decimated and crumbling, and to have to also then question when I go into town, if I want to go in with my children to Minneapolis, like, that's not super attractive to me. And I'm saying this as somebody who spent a very large amount of time there. And so to know what the future of the city is, or where the city is right now, but also what the future could be if we don't change things, if things do not turn around, and if the DSA and other bad actors get more of a stake in things, is really troubling and really concerning, and not at all gleeful from my Republican, partisan perspective. And so it's scary to see. It's hard to think about. And we know this election in just under 2 weeks is going to have some big ramifications of where we go from here.
No, absolutely. And one thing I would point out about Republicans is that this is a serious problem for the DFL. The reason why it's a serious problem for the DFL is because they dominate the city of Minneapolis, and there's not a geographic area in the state right now where the Republicans dominate to the same degree. And so when we talk about some of the internal party problems that Republicans have, those can largely be worked out at a much smaller scale, and sometimes not even bubble up to becoming a policing or a governing issue, I should say, because Republicans don't control those geographic areas with such large populations. The reality is this problem, I think, is more significant because the DFL is such a strong party in Minneapolis. It is a one-party town, and so when this faction breaks off and they maneuver the way they do under the umbrella of the DFL, it does have more serious implications. And so while Republicans in some ways may be gleeful at it, also recognize why this is a serious issue, is because the Democrats have a one-party control of Minneapolis, and they've done that very aggressively over the years. And this is, while it's always going to be tough, I think in our lifetime, certainly my lifetime, for Republicans to win in Minneapolis and St. Paul, this is one of the consequences of Democrats dominating and Republicans not offering viable alternatives, is that in reality, the Republicans in Minneapolis have been passed up by the DSA. And one more point to that, one of the things I just wanted to touch on is we have, and he mentioned a little bit about Mary Moriarty. One of the things that we have been complimentary to Mary Morty about is the truth in advertising that she ran her campaign on. She did govern towards a lot of those policies. Now, we did an episode a couple weeks back with Joe Tarab where there were some things that she didn't discuss that she's doing, and I encourage you to go listen to that episode that we did with Joe. But one of the things that I think makes us, because we've acknowledged that Moriarty did run in that type of way to be that type of progressive champion inside the criminal justice system. On the flip side, there is a lot of DSA, there's a lot of, I think, not truth in advertising that's going on with some of these elected officials with the DSA. And that was something also that Jim wanted to get out. And I think it's something that we should be advocates for informing the electorate about, is people need to do their research and draw the distinction between who is a Democrat and who is supported and backed by the DSA.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good point. I'm glad you called it out, because we've had lots of conversations about candidates, left, right, and center, of what they've campaigned on and what they've run. I remember we had one on a little internal debate here about Governor Walz and what he campaigned on. I argue he did not campaign on being a progressive governor. You argue that he, what he has done is what he did campaign on. We've had that conversation. I think that is something that is what voters should desire of any candidate, is that transparency. I mean, that is one thing that when I worked for Congressman Emmer, folks would always leave the office saying, I might not agree with him, but I know where he stands on things. And I think authenticity and transparency is something that elected officials and candidates should hold dear and cherish and try to be and embrace. And I think that while I've long said I support candidates kind of using the rules to their advantage, whether it comes to endorsements or however they see fit, it is really fishy and suspicious and just really icky, right? That they're not being transparent when they're running under the DFL umbrella. And I'm saying that as somebody who does not like the DFL umbrella, right? That's not an umbrella I'm planning on standing under anytime soon. But certainly the DSA and DFL, I mean, if we look at that Venn diagram, there's, that sliver in the middle is not necessarily always so large. And so it is really disingenuous to have these candidates claiming to be Democrats or DFL endorsed and under that banner, and then getting into office and launching a whole new agenda. And it's really problematic.
Yes. One last point I want to make is you have discussed storytelling as an effective way of communication. And I think this episode embodies that kind of philosophy that you educated me on more than ever, is that for the 45 to 50 minutes that we interviewed Jim, he was telling the story from his perspective, and very powerful way in which to share a message. Much more effective, I think, than just the candidate or the principal getting up there, is to have someone like him going up and telling that story, because it was very impactful, and it was a real world example of something that you highlighted as a communication strategy. And I was well aware of that as he was talking.
Absolutely. He was great messenger for what his business has gone through, for what any business owner and person living in Minneapolis has been going through, and really what is at stake in this election and how elections are so important. He mentioned, this is just a handful or a dozen of voters that determine some of these city council seats. And we've seen that in state house and state rep seats. And it's just a good reminder that your vote matters, and voting is an imperative and a privilege, and please participate.
Get out and vote. Speaking of getting out, what in the hell are you doing with your fantasy league this year? I don't like it. I have a feeling that I don't like what's going on.
Because we're tied.
I know.
I mean, I gotta say, going into the evening games on Sunday, I was up by 1. And we made different picks. I sadly chose the Buccaneers, and man, oh man, did they disappoint.
Oh, did you? You made it terrible.
My strategy each week is.
Well, let's hear this. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Take the floor. Tell me your strategy. Go ahead.
It is
Everyone stop.
very well
Tell me
thought
the
out
strategy.
and based on lots of research. No, I mean, I very largely pick based on rankings and, home teams. And, I have a couple things I take into consideration.
Keep
But
going.
every week, I choose somewhere between one and, usually 1 and 3, 1, 2, or 3, like kind of underdogs or upsets or something where, if it's, a 5th ranked team versus a 10th ranked team, I'll go with, I don't ever choose, I'm not as wild and crazy to choose like, a 0-4 versus somebody who's undefeated. But it's helped me in the past, and so I've done that. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And Buccaneers disappointed me and made that tie happen this week.
I'm
We
glad
stand tied for 2nd place.
we stand tied, and Ben Golick is still with.
Holding out strong.
We've got to start joining forces.
He's up by 3.
He's up by 3. We need to somehow mess with his. We got to that needs to be our focus as long as I stay ahead. Thank you. Most significantly in this podcast, thank you for on camera and on audio revealing the secret strategy of your picks. Now I know
it is very deep.
Now I know how to plan accordingly. So now there's a little insight. It's taken It's taken me 3 seasons, but I finally get to know how the sauce is made. Becky, thank you so much for doing this today. Thank you to Jim, and thank you to all for listening to this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.